I'm Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Morgan, 58 years old, and I've spent 35 years flying the most expensive fighter jets America owns. But at my father's 60th birthday party, my cousin, a 52-year-old fitness trainer who's never left Virginia, stood up in front of 50 guests and asked me this: "Hey Rebecca, how's that office job in the Air Force going? Lots of paperwork to file?" The room went silent. His father, Admiral James Carson, a Navy SEAL legend, slowly set down his glass. And when I whispered 3 words, "Steel Phoenix," the air in that room changed completely. Because Admiral Carson knew that name. It was the call sign of the pilot who flew into a war zone to save his SEAL team when they were surrounded in Afghanistan. The pilot special operators still talk about in closed meetings. The pilot they thought was a man. But Steel Phoenix was me. And for 28 years, no one in my family knew. The house where I grew up still stands on Maple Street in Springfield, Virginia. White clapboard, 2 stories, with a swing in the backyard my father built when I was 6. I can close my eyes and see every detail. The way morning light slanted through the kitchen window. How my mother's coffee always smelled like cinnamon and hope. The sound of my father's drafting pencils scratching across blueprints at the dining table late into the night. He was an aerospace engineer, the kind who could look at a wing design and tell you within 3 decimal points how much lift it would generate. My mother was a nurse, the overnight shift kind, who came home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion, but always had energy to make breakfast. Weekend barbecues were a religion in our family. Every Saturday, from May through September, my father would fire up the grill he'd welded himself from spare parts. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, everyone gathered in our backyard. And the center of attention was always Admiral James Carson, my Aunt Catherine's husband. Even then, before he became an admiral, before the classified missions and the medals, he carried authority like other men carried wallets. When he spoke, adults stopped talking. When he laughed, the whole yard relaxed. I was 8 years old the first time I saw a fighter jet up close. My father took me to an air show at Andrews Air Force Base. The moment I heard that roar, felt the ground shake as an F-15 screamed overhead. Something inside me locked into place. I ran back to the car breathless and announced to my parents, with the absolute certainty only children possess, "I'm going to be a pilot." My father smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "That's a wonderful dream, sweetheart." But my mother exchanged a look with Aunt Catherine that I didn't understand until years later. This was 1974. Women weren't allowed to fly combat aircraft. That was work for men, dangerous work, real work. My cousin Tyler was 6 then, all knees and elbows and loud opinions. When I told him about my dream during a family cookout, he laughed so hard he spilled his juice box. "Girls can't be pilots, they'd get too scared." I remember the way his voice carried across the yard, how other kids picked up the laugh, how my face burned. Admiral Carson was standing nearby, listening. He didn't correct his son. He just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read and turned back to his conversation. That moment planted something in me, not doubt, but determination. I stopped talking about my dreams around Tyler. Around most of the family, actually. I learned early that some ambitions are better kept quiet until they're already accomplished facts. I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1985, top 15% of my class. The day I got my acceptance letter, my father framed it and hung it in his office. My mother cried, the happy kind of tears, but I saw worry behind them. The military was still figuring out what to do with women who wanted to do more than type and file. Combat aviation remained closed, a boys' club with jet fuel in its veins. Everything changed in 1991. The Air Force opened fighter pilot training to women. I was 27 years old, already a transport pilot with 3 years of experience, and I applied the same day the policy changed. The notification came on a Tuesday. I'd been accepted into fighter training. My father organized a celebration dinner. The whole family came. My mother made her famous lasagna. Aunt Catherine brought a cake. Tyler showed up late, girlfriend on his arm, smile too wide. He was 26 then, recently dropped out of community college, working the front desk at a gym. When my father announced my acceptance, toasting with cheap champagne, Tyler raised his glass. "Congrats, Becca. Really lucky break for you." Though flying planes isn't quite the same as real combat, you know? The table went quiet in that way it does when someone says something everyone knows is wrong, but nobody wants to address. Admiral Carson set down his fork. The look he gave his son carried disappointment so heavy I could feel it from across the table. Tyler didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, and that's why he kept talking, filling the silence with observations about transport pilots and desk jobs and how the real heroes were the ones on the ground. I didn't argue. I'd learned that lesson at 8 years old. I just smiled, thanked him for coming, and changed the subject. My father walked me into my car that night. He put his hand on my shoulder, his favorite gesture of affection, economical with emotion, but heavy with meaning. Don't let him get to you, sweetheart. He's fighting his own battles. I nodded, understanding more than my father probably intended. Tyler had tried twice to get into the Naval Academy, failed both attempts, not because he wasn't smart enough, but because he couldn't sustain the discipline. Admiral Carson had pulled strings, made calls, written recommendation letters that carried the weight of a career spent in special operations. None of it worked. Tyler washed out of the preliminary physical fitness tests both times, showed up late to interviews, couldn't maintain the focus required. The watch my father gave me that night sits on my wrist right now. Silver, practical, with an inscription on the back. Fly high, my girl. I wore it through every training flight, every combat mission, every moment when I needed to remember who I was flying for. Fighter training broke most of the people who started it. Out of my class of 48, only 22 graduated. The rest washed out. Couldn't handle the G-forces, couldn't make the split-second calculations, couldn't control the aircraft when it wanted to kill you, couldn't learn to think in 3 dimensions while moving at 600 miles per hour. I wasn't the best pilot in my class, but I was consistent. I didn't panic when the instructor cut my engine at altitude to see how I'd handle the emergency. I didn't freeze when they simulated combat scenarios where every choice was terrible, and you had to pick the least terrible option in under 2 seconds. My call sign didn't come until later, until after Afghanistan. Call signs never come from you. They're given by your squadron, usually after you do something memorable, sometimes embarrassing, sometimes legendary. Mine came from a night I still don't talk about at most family gatherings. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I married David Mitchell in 1992. He was an aerospace engineer, working contractor support on base, quiet and brilliant and kind in a way that felt like coming home. The wedding was small, held at a chapel in Colorado Springs near the base where I was stationed. Tyler came, brought his girlfriend, different one from the year before, and made a toast that managed to be congratulatory and condescending in the same breath. Congratulations to my cousin, who's finally found something important to do besides flying expensive government planes around. David squeezed my hand under the table. Later that night, in our hotel room, he asked if Tyler had a problem with me. I told him the truth. Tyler had a problem with himself, and I was just the convenient target. The next 18 years were a blur of deployments, training missions, promotions. Bosnia in '95, my first taste of actual combat, flying support missions while ethnic cleansing raged below. Kosovo in '99, watching cities burn from 30,000 feet. Iraq in 2003 and 4, Operation Iraqi Freedom, where the desert stretched forever and every shadow could hide insurgents with surface-to-air missiles. Afghanistan starting in 2006, multiple deployments, each one blending into the next until I couldn't remember which mountains were which province. Through all of it, Tyler stayed in Virginia. He worked at different gyms, eventually became a personal trainer. He married Lisa, an elementary school teacher with patient eyes and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. They tried for kids, but it never happened. Medical issues I heard through the family grapevine, though nobody spoke about it directly. Every time I came home, once, maybe twice a year, Tyler had comments. Small ones delivered with a smile so you couldn't quite call him out without looking sensitive. Must be nice having job security with the government. How much does it cost taxpayers every time you take one of those birds up? My dad actually saw combat. You know, boots on the ground. Each comment landed like a paper cut. Small enough to ignore, painful enough to remember. Christmas 2005. My daughter Emily was 13 then, at that age where she noticed everything adults tried to hide. We were at my parents' house, the whole family gathered around a tree that touched the ceiling. Tyler was holding forth about discipline and mental toughness, concepts he'd picked up from fitness magazines and repackaged as personal philosophy. Emily sat next to me on the couch, quiet until Tyler took a breath. "Mom's a pilot," she said, her voice clear. "She flies in wars." Tyler smiled at her, the way adults smile at children who don't understand the world yet. "That's great, sweetie, but flying is different from fighting. Your mom does important work, sure, but it's not like she's dodging bullets or anything." Emily looked at me confused. "Mom, you don't tell them what you do?" I shook my head slightly, a gesture only she could see. "It's complicated, honey." Later, helping with dishes, she pressed harder. "Why don't you tell Uncle Tyler the truth? Why do you let him talk to you like that?" I rinsed a plate, buying time to find the right words. "Because sometimes being right isn't as important as keeping peace." She wasn't satisfied with that answer. Neither was I. The truth I couldn't explain to my 13-year-old daughter. I'd made a choice years earlier to stay quiet about my accomplishments, partly from genuine humility. I was raised to believe good work speaks for itself. Partly from security concerns. Much of what I did was classified. But mostly, if I'm honest, because I saw how Tyler struggled. I watched him fail, watched him grasp for significance, watched him live in his father's enormous shadow. I thought my silence was kindness. I thought if I didn't shine too bright, maybe it would hurt him less. What I didn't understand then was that my kindness looked like weakness, and weakness to someone like Tyler was permission to keep pushing. Afghanistan, 2010, September. The deployment that changed everything. I was piloting an A-10 Thunderbolt, call sign Steel Phoenix, though I didn't have that name yet. The A-10 isn't glamorous like an F-15 or sleek like an F-22. It's an ugly, brutal aircraft built around a 30mm rotary cannon that sounds like God ripping apart the sky. Fighter pilots call it the Warthog. Ground troops call it the most beautiful thing they've ever seen. 3:47 in the morning, Helmand Province. I was flying routine close air support, along with my wingman, Captain Jason Torres, call sign Raptor 6. The Hindu Kush Mountains looked like black teeth against a blacker sky. Radio chatter was minimal, just us and the stars and the weight of ordnance under our wings. Then the call came. "Any air assets in the vicinity, this is Neptune Team. We are taking heavy fire and need immediate support." The voice was controlled, but I heard death behind it. "Neptune Team, 8 Navy SEALs on a reconnaissance mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. They'd been compromised, surrounded in a narrow valley by what intelligence later estimated was 200 Taliban fighters. The first extraction helicopter had taken damage and limped back to base. Neptune Team was pinned down with wounded and running out of ammunition. Without air support, they had maybe 20 minutes before they were overrun. I checked my fuel gauge. 20 minutes of flight time remaining, maybe less depending on how hard I pushed the engines. Standard procedure was clear. When you hit minimum fuel, you return to base. No exceptions. If I stayed to help, I might not make it back. Jason's voice crackled over the radio. "Phoenix, we're bingo fuel. We have to RTB. Return to base." The smart call, the safe call, the call that would keep me alive and let 8 men die in a dark valley while I flew home to hot coffee and a warm bed. I thought about those 8 men. They had families, kids waiting for them, parents who'd raised them, partners who'd kissed them goodbye and prayed they'd come home. In my headset, I could hear gunfire, explosions, someone screaming for a medic. I pressed the transmit button. "Neptune Team, this is Steel Phoenix. I'm coming in." Jason tried again. "Phoenix, negative. We don't have the fuel." But I was already descending, dropping altitude so fast my instruments screamed warnings. The valley was a death trap, narrow and deep with high ridges on both sides perfect for ambush. Tracer fire lit up the darkness, red lines scratching across my vision. Muzzle flashes dotted the ridgelines like fireflies. My targeting systems painted the scene in green and black. Thermal signatures of men, weapons, vehicles. I could see Neptune Team's position, a tight cluster in a dried riverbed, completely surrounded. Standard doctrine said to stay high, above effective range of small arms fire, and engage from a position of safety. I went low instead, so low I could see individual figures running across the valley floor. The 30mm cannon roared, that distinctive sound that makes your whole body shake. Tracer rounds from the ground reached up toward me, some passing close enough that I watched them streak past the canopy. An RPG, rocket-propelled grenade, launched from the eastern ridge, smoke trail bright against the darkness. I jerked the stick, pulling G's that grayed my vision at the edges. Felt the Warthog respond with that heavy, sluggish authority that's kept it flying since the 70s. The RPG passed close enough that I saw the warhead, missing by maybe 15 feet. I made another pass, another, then another, working the cannon in short, precise bursts, walking fire along the ridgelines where the Taliban positions clustered thickest. Fuel gauge flashed red, 5%, 4%. The extraction helicopter radioed that they were inbound. Steel Phoenix, Neptune team is moving to pickup point, keep their corridor clear. I emptied everything I had left. Cannon rounds, a few remaining rockets, making as much noise and destruction as possible to give those 8 men space to run. Steel Phoenix, Neptune team is aboard. All 8 souls accounted for thanks to you. The helicopter pilot's voice carried emotion usually stripped from military communications. You saved their lives. I didn't respond. I was too busy calculating fuel, distance, glide ratio if the engines quit. My own base was too far. I radioed the nearest friendly airfield, explained my situation. They cleared me for emergency landing. I put the Warthog down with 2% fuel remaining according to the gauge, though later the crew chief told me the tanks were essentially dry, running on fumes and prayer. My legs shook when I climbed out of the cockpit. Adrenaline crash, delayed fear, the realization that I'd just violated standing orders and gotten away with it only because of luck and outcomes. My squadron commander called me into his office. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Reeves, career fighter pilot with a face like weathered stone. I stood at attention, expecting to be court-martialed for endangering a multi-million-dollar aircraft. Instead, he said, "Sit down, Morgan." I sat. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You broke regulations tonight. You flew past minimum fuel. You engaged targets below recommended altitude. You put yourself in an untenable position. By every protocol we have, you should be grounded pending investigation." My mouth was dry. "Yes, sir." He let the silence stretch. Then, "But 8 men are alive because you made those choices. One of those men is the son of a rear admiral. Another is engaged to be married next month. 2 are fathers. You saved 8 lives by risking 1. The math works." He pulled a folder from his desk. "This is your recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross. I'm also recommending you for early promotion to Major. What you did tonight wasn't just brave. It was calculated risk-taking at the highest level. That's the kind of judgment we need in senior officers." I didn't know what to say. "Thank you, sir," seemed inadequate. He waved me off. "Don't thank me. Thank whatever gave you the clarity to make the right call under pressure. Now get out of here and get some sleep. You look like death." The call sign came 2 days later. I walked into the ready room and someone had changed the name board. Where it used to say Morgan, it now read Steel Phoenix. Captain Sarah Chen, one of my squadron mates, explained, "Phoenix bird rises from fire to save others. You flew through hell to pull those SEALs out. Steel because you're hard to kill and harder to shake. It fits. Call signs stick forever." From that day forward, I was Steel Phoenix. The name appeared on my flight suit, my logbook, official communications. It became more real than my actual name in some ways. What I didn't know, wouldn't know for 8 more years, was that the Neptune team leader that night was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hayes, a SEAL who'd trained directly under Admiral James Carson. Hayes later became Deputy Commander of SEAL Team 6, and in the years after, the story of Steel Phoenix became legend in the special operations community. They didn't know my name, didn't know my gender, just knew the call sign. Knew that somewhere out there was a pilot who'd flown into fire to bring people home. Admiral Carson knew the story. He'd heard it from multiple sources, had discussed it in operational briefings, had used it as an example when teaching about air-ground cooperation. He just never connected it to his niece, the quiet woman who flew planes and never talked about what she actually did. I came home on leave 3 weeks after that night in Afghanistan. My family threw a welcome home dinner, not a big production, just immediate family, the way we always did. Tyler asked how the deployment went. Busy, I told him, which was true. He made some comment about how at least I was back safe, unlike soldiers who actually see combat. I smiled and nodded and changed the subject. David, my husband, watched the exchange from across the table. Later, helping me unpack, he said, "You're never going to tell them, are you?" I folded his shirt, precise creases. "Tell them what?" He sat on the bed. "About what you do. About how good you are. About the people you've saved." I added the shirt to the drawer, started on another. "It's classified." He shook his head. "Some of it is, not all of it. You could tell them the broad strokes, let them understand. Instead, you let Tyler treat you like you're filing paperwork at a desk job." I closed the drawer harder than necessary. It's not about letting him do anything, it's about not creating more problems than I solve. David stood up, moved to stand behind me, hands gentle on my shoulders. "Becca, I love you, but you need to understand something. Your kindness is being mistaken for weakness, and eventually, that's going to cost more than you think." I leaned back against him. "I know. But I didn't. Not really. I thought I was being noble. Thought my silence was strength. Didn't realize I was teaching people that I could be dismissed, diminished, erased from my own story." The years rolled forward. 2012, promoted to major. 2014, commanding a flight squadron, training younger pilots in the skills that kept them alive. 2016, my last combat deployment, this time to Syria. 2018, retirement after 32 years of service. A ceremony at Langley Air Force Base, medals and speeches, and a flag folded into a triangle. My parents came, my daughters, Admiral Carson and Aunt Catherine, Tyler and Lisa. The base commander gave a speech about my career, the combat missions, the lives saved, the leadership that shaped a generation of pilots. Tyler stood at the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. 3 months after I retired, David died. Lung cancer, aggressive and merciless. He was diagnosed in February, gone by March. Barely enough time to understand we were losing him before he was lost. The funeral was small, the way he would have wanted. Tyler came, offered condolences that sounded genuine, then added, "At least you have your pension from the Air Force. David made sure you're taken care of financially." I stared at him, trying to parse whether he was being deliberately cruel or just oblivious. Lisa touched his arm, a gentle warning, but the words were already out there. I nodded, thanked him for coming, and turned away before I said something that couldn't be unsaid. While cleaning out David's office, I found a letter he'd written before he died. His handwriting shaky from the medication, but still legible. "Rebecca, my love, you are the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known, but I worry you've spent so many years hiding your light to make others comfortable. That's not kindness, sweetheart. That's self-denial. Promise me that after I'm gone, you'll live with pride in what you've accomplished. Don't let anyone, not even family, make you feel small. You deserve respect. Don't forget that. Love always, David." I cried reading it. Cried for the husband I'd lost, for the life we wouldn't finish together, for all the times I'd stayed silent when I should have spoken. But even grief and good advice couldn't change habits built over decades. I kept the letter, kept my silence, kept living as if being underestimated was just the price of family peace. May 2023, my father's 60th birthday. The family planned a major celebration. Everyone invited, friends from decades of his career, neighbors, the works. I flew in from Colorado, where I'd settled after retirement. My daughters came from Boston and New York. The party was scheduled for Saturday evening, but I arrived Friday to help with preparations. The house looked the same as always, though my parents seemed smaller somehow, more fragile. Time does that, stealing inches and strength when you're not paying attention. Tyler and Lisa arrived Friday evening. Tyler looked older too, heavier, hair thinning, lines around his eyes that spoke of stress rather than laughter. But his voice was the same, loud and confident, filling whatever space he occupied. He hugged me at the door. "Becca, how's retirement treating you?" I told him it was fine. I was keeping busy. "Doing what? You must be bored after all those years in the Air Force." His tone was light, joking, but I'd learned to hear the edge underneath. Writing my memoir, actually, and doing volunteer work with veterans organizations. He laughed. A memoir? About what? All those training flights? Emily, standing nearby, tensed. I touched her arm gently. Don't engage, not worth it. Admiral Carson arrived shortly after, moving with a slight limp I hadn't seen before. Knee surgery, he explained when I asked. The delayed consequences of 30 years jumping from aircraft and running over unforgiving terrain. But his eyes were still sharp, still carried that weight of authority that made people straighten their posture unconsciously. Dinner. Friday night was casual, pizza and salad around the dining table. Tyler dominated conversation with stories about his gym, his clients, his theories on discipline and mental toughness. I listened more than I spoke, a role I'd perfected. Admiral Carson was quiet too, watching his son with an expression I couldn't quite read. When Tyler asked me about my retirement plans, I kept it vague. Writing, traveling, spending time with family. Must be nice, he said, having a pension and all that free time. Though I guess after years of desk work, you're used to taking it easy. My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. My mother's smile went brittle. Emily looked ready to argue, but I shook my head slightly. Let it go. Later, on the back porch, I found Admiral Carson alone. He stood at the railing, beer in hand, looking at the yard where we'd played as children. He glanced over when I stepped outside. Rebecca. His voice carried the kind of warmth usually reserved for fellow veterans. Admiral. He shook his head. Just James, please. I've been retired long enough to shed the formality with family. We stood in comfortable silence. Then he said, Heard you did impressive work in Afghanistan. Multiple deployments, wasn't it? I nodded. 4 tours total, plus Iraq, Syria, Kosovo, Bosnia, 32 years all told. He turned to face me directly. Tyler doesn't understand what you did over there, what any of it meant. I shrugged, uncomfortable. He doesn't need to understand. Different worlds. James studied me. You know about the Neptune team extraction, don't you? The story about Steel Phoenix? My heart stopped. I've heard of it. He smiled, something sad in it. Course you have. Everyone in the community has heard that story. Best example of close air support I've seen in 40 years. Pilot flew into hell on fumes to save 8 men. Legendary stuff. I didn't respond, couldn't trust my voice. He continued. I trained the team leader, Marcus Hayes. Good man. He tells that story whenever anyone asks about air-ground cooperation. Says Steel Phoenix is proof that the best pilots don't fly by the book. They fly by what's right. I managed. Sounds like someone worth knowing. James nodded, turned back to the yard. Yeah, always wondered who that pilot really was. Never could find out. Classification and all. But I'd like to shake their hand someday. Tell them they saved people I care about. He raised his beer slightly. A toast to an absent hero. I raised my own in return. Throat too tight to speak. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm. Perfect weather for a party. My mother and Aunt Catherine orchestrated preparations with military precision. Tables, chairs, food, decorations. I helped where I could, arranging flowers, setting up the bar, testing the sound system for the music my father pretended he didn't want but secretly loved. By early evening, guests started arriving. Old colleagues from my father's engineering firm, neighbors who'd known our family for generations, distant relatives I barely recognized. Tyler worked the crowd naturally, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, playing the role of outgoing son and nephew. He had a gift for it, making people feel seen and interesting. I wondered sometimes if he'd have been happy in sales or politics, something where that charm could have built a career. Instead, he'd stayed in fitness, a field where success required discipline he'd never quite maintained. The party hit full swing by 7. About 50 people filled the house and backyard, conversation and laughter creating that pleasant roar of successful gatherings. My father stood near the grill with Admiral Carson and a cluster of his old engineering buddies, all of them gesturing with beers and telling stories that had gotten better with age. My mother held court in the kitchen with a group of her nursing friends, swapping tales of night shifts and difficult patients. I circulated, making small talk, catching up with people I hadn't seen in years. Hannah found me by the drink table. Mom, you okay? You seem tense. I smiled at my younger daughter. Just tired, honey. Lot of people. She hugged me quickly. Tyler's been drinking. Watch yourself. I'd noticed. Tyler's voice had gotten louder, his gestures broader. Not drunk, but definitely loosened by alcohol. He stood near the food table with a group of younger cousins and neighbors, entertaining them with a story about training a professional athlete. His confidence when he had an audience was magnetic. You could see why people liked him. But there was something performative about it too, a desperate edge I'd learned to recognize. 8:15. My father had just finished blowing out candles on his birthday cake. Everyone applauded, sang the traditional song. The mood was warm, celebratory. Perfect. Then Tyler raised his champagne glass and called out, loud enough to cut through the noise. Hey everyone, can I say something? The crowd quieted, turned toward him. My stomach dropped. I knew that tone, knew what was coming, even if I didn't know the specific words. Tyler continued, smile wide. We're here celebrating Uncle Thomas, an amazing man who built an incredible career. And I want to give a shout out to my family, especially my cousin Rebecca. She just retired after an impressive career in the Air Force. A few people clapped politely. Tyler kept going. I think it's great she had such a stable office job. I mean, not everyone can do dangerous work like my dad did, right? Some people just need to, fly around in expensive planes. Uncomfortable laughter from a few guests. Most people looked confused, unsure if this was meant to be funny or if they were witnessing something else. Emily started to stand, but I grabbed her wrist gently. Not yet. Tyler was still talking. I'm just saying there's a difference between real combat and paperwork. Rebecca's a good person, but let's not pretend she's some kind of hero or anything. She filed reports and took training flights. That's not exactly Medal of Honor territory. The backyard had gone completely silent, 50 people frozen, watching. My mother stood by the back door, pitcher of lemonade forgotten in her hands. My father had returned with propane, standing at the edge of the patio with murder in his eyes. Admiral Carson was halfway across the yard, having stopped mid-conversation. His face had gone carefully blank, the expression of someone exerting tremendous control. I felt numb, distant, like watching this happen to someone else. 28 years I'd let this happen. Taken the comments, swallowed the dismissals, made myself small to keep peace. And here it was, the culmination. My entire career reduced to paperwork and training flights in front of everyone who mattered. Admiral Carson moved. 3 steps that seemed to cross the yard in one heartbeat. He stopped directly in front of his son, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. Boy, do you know what your cousin did in the Air Force? Tyler blinked, some of the confidence draining. She flew planes, Dad. Admiral Carson's voice dropped even lower. Does she have a call sign? Tyler looked confused. A what? The Admiral turned slowly to face me. Every eye in the yard followed his gaze. Rebecca, do you have a call sign? The question hung in the air like smoke. I could lie, could shake my head, deflect, keep my secrets safe behind their walls of classification and habit. But David's letter burned in my memory. Don't let anyone make you feel small. You deserve respect. And I was so tired of being invisible. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Steel Phoenix? Admiral Carson staggered like I'd hit him. His face went white, then red, then white again. What did you say? Louder now, my throat opening. Steel Phoenix, that was my call sign. A-10 Warthog pilot, close air support, 22 years of combat missions across 4 theaters. Admiral Carson's eyes went impossibly wide. You can't be... Steel Phoenix is... He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't reconcile the legend he'd carried for 13 years with the woman standing in front of him. The niece he'd known since she was born. The quiet pilot who never talked about her work. The person his son had just publicly humiliated. He turned back to Tyler, and the rage that crossed his face made several people step back. Apologize, no. Tyler stood frozen, mouth open. Dad, I didn't know... Admiral Carson's voice cracked like a whip. Now. The word carried 30 years of command authority. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an order. It was inevitability. Tyler's face cycled through shock, confusion, the first edges of embarrassment and shame. He looked at me, at his father, at the 50 witnesses watching his public execution. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I didn't know I didn't understand." Admiral Carson wasn't finished. He addressed the entire yard, voice carrying to every corner. Steel Phoenix is the call sign of the pilot who flew into a hot extraction zone in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, to save a Navy SEAL reconnaissance team that was surrounded and taking casualties. She flew low enough to take enemy fire herself. She cleared the corridor long enough for the evacuation helicopter to extract every single man. 8 souls came home because of her. He turned back to Tyler. Those 8 men included Marcus Hayes, who I trained personally, who is now a deputy commander in SEAL Team 6, who has spent 13 years telling that story as the gold standard of what it means to not leave people behind. Do you understand what I'm telling you, son? Do you understand who you just called a paper pusher in front of our entire family? Tyler's face had gone gray. Lisa stood beside him, one hand covering her mouth. Admiral Carson looked at me again, and this time his eyes were wet. He did something I'd never seen him do in 40 years. He came to attention and saluted me, not the casual acknowledgement between friends, but a full formal salute, the kind you give to heroes and flags and fallen brothers. "Lieutenant Colonel Morgan, it is my honor." His voice broke on the last word. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what was happening. 50 people watching as Admiral James Carson, legend, warrior, the man who defined toughness for 2 generations, saluted me with tears on his face. I returned the salute automatically, muscle memory from 3 decades in uniform. When we dropped our hands, he stepped forward and hugged me, brief but fierce. "Thank you," he whispered, "for what you did that night, for all the nights, for serving with honor when no one here understood what that meant." The dam broke. My mother appeared at my side, pulling me into her arms. My father followed. Emily, Hannah, Aunt Catherine. People I'd known my whole life gathering around to say they were sorry. They didn't know. They were proud. Some cried. Some just stood there looking stunned. And through it all, Tyler stood alone by the food table, his carefully constructed identity crumbling like sandcastles at high tide. He'd spent 30 years building himself up by tearing me down. And in 3 words, Steel Phoenix, I'd revealed the truth he'd never wanted to see, that I didn't need his approval, never had. I was already everything he'd pretended to be. The party dissolved slowly after that. People left in clusters, some stopping to shake my hand or hug me, others departing quickly as if proximity to Tyler's humiliation might be contagious. My father stood with his arm around my shoulders for a long time, not saying anything, just anchoring me to earth. My mother kept crying and apologizing, though I wasn't sure what she thought she needed to be forgiven for. Emily and Hannah flanked me like bodyguards, glaring at anyone who looked at me with anything less than reverence. Tyler left without another word. Lisa guided him to their car, her hand on his elbow the way you'd lead someone in shock. I watched them drive away and felt nothing, not satisfaction, not anger, not even relief, just exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones after carrying weight for too long. Admiral Carson stayed after everyone else had gone. He sat with my father and me on the back porch, while my mother and Aunt Catherine cleaned inside, their voices low and urgent through the screen door. James, I could think of him as James now, held a beer he wasn't drinking, turning the bottle in his hands. "I owe you an apology, Rebecca." His voice was rough, scraped raw. "I let Tyler disrespect you for years. I heard the comments, saw the pattern. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it, that you didn't need me to intervene." He looked at me finally. "That was cowardice on my part, not strength on yours." I wanted to tell him it was fine, to smooth it over the way I always had, but David's letter kept echoing in my head. "You deserve respect." "I appreciate that, James, but I'm not blameless here either. I could have spoken up. I chose not to." My father shifted in his chair. "Why didn't you, sweetheart? All those years, all those accomplishments. Why hide them? How to explain the calculus I'd done, the equation that never balanced. I thought it would make things worse. Tyler was struggling. You could all see that. He'd failed to get into the Naval Academy, couldn't find his footing in life. Every time he saw me, he saw his own failures reflected back. I thought if I stayed quiet about my successes, it would hurt him less. I paused, finding words for something I'd barely admitted to myself. But really, I was afraid. Afraid of being too much. Afraid of taking up too much space. Afraid that if I shined too bright, people would resent me for it. James's jaw tightened. That's what I did to him. Put so much pressure on Tyler to live up to some impossible standard that he broke under the weight of it. And then he passed that poison on to you. He set down the beer with careful precision. I need to tell you something about that night in Helmand, about what it meant. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, worn smooth with handling. Inside was a challenge coin, Navy SEAL Trident on one side, unit insignia on the other. Marcus Hayes sent this to me 5 years ago, asked me to give it to Steel Phoenix if I ever found out who they were. He said, and I'm quoting here, "I owe that pilot my life. Everything I've done since that night exists because they chose to stay." James pressed the coin into my palm. It was heavy, warm from being carried. Marcus has 3 kids now. Daniel Rodriguez, the team sniper. His daughter just started college. Ryan Mitchell became a physician assistant, works at a VA hospital. James Cooper trains service dogs for veterans with PTSD. Every one of those 8 men built lives that wouldn't exist if you'd followed regulations and flown home. My fingers closed around the coin. I was just doing my job. No, James's voice was absolute. You made a choice that went beyond duty. You risked your life for people you'd never met. That's not job description, that's character. He stood, movements stiff from old injuries and new emotion. I'm going to talk to Tyler. Not tonight. He's not ready. But soon. Because he needs to understand what he's been doing. Not just to you, but to himself. After he left, my father and I sat in the darkness. Crickets sang their summer songs. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then fell silent. My father's hand found mine, squeezed gently. Your mother and I are proud of you. We always have been. But I think maybe we didn't say it enough, didn't make it clear enough. We let you disappear into the background because that's where you seemed comfortable. His voice cracked. I should have made you visible. Should have told Tyler to shut his mouth years ago. Dad, you couldn't have known. I'm your father. I should have known, should have asked, should have made space for you to tell us. He wiped at his eyes with his free hand. Promise me something. Promise me you'll stop hiding. Stop making yourself smaller. You earned every bit of respect you're finally getting, and you deserve to walk in that. I promised, though I wasn't sure yet what that would look like. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling where I'd once stuck glow-in-the-dark stars and constellation patterns. My phone buzzed repeatedly, texts from cousins I barely knew, friends of my parents, even a few reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. I ignored all of them except one from Marcus Hayes. Admiral Carson gave me your contact info. Would like to talk when you're ready. No pressure. Just wanted to say thank you. Finally knowing who to thank. I typed back. I'd like that. Let me catch my breath first. His response came immediately. Take all the time you need. We've waited 13 years. We can wait a little longer. Sunday morning, I woke to voices downstairs. Emily and Hannah, talking with my mother about something that involved a lot of emphatic gesturing I could hear in their tones, if not their words. I pulled on clothes and went down to find them at the kitchen table, surrounded by newspapers and tablets. Mom! Emily looked up, expression somewhere between fury and pride. You're trending on Twitter. I had no idea what that meant. Hannah turned her tablet to show me. A video of the birthday party, shaky footage someone must have filmed on their phone. Tyler's voice, clear and mocking, talking about office jobs and training flights. Then my voice, smaller but steady, saying Steel Phoenix. The video cut off there, but it had already been viewed 500,000 times. Comments ranged from supportive to skeptical to outright hostile. Who posted this? My voice sounded distant in my own ears. Emily checked. Someone tagged as being at the party, probably one of the younger cousins. It's been shared by a bunch of military pages and veteran groups. She scrolled through comments. Most people are defending you. Some are calling it fake. A few are demanding proof. There won't be proof. I sat down heavily. Most of that mission is still classified. The names of the SEAL team, the exact location, tactical details, all of it sealed. My mother set coffee in front of me, her hands shaking slightly. Can they make it go away? The video? Why would we want to? Hannah's voice was sharp. Mom spent 3 decades letting people underestimate her. Now the truth is out and you want to hide it again? I want to protect her. From what? From finally getting the recognition she earned? I held up a hand. Both of you stop. Hannah, your grandmother is trying to help. Mom, Hannah has a point. The truth is out. We can't put it back in the box, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. I sipped the coffee, buying time to organize my thoughts. But I need to be smart about this. If I start talking publicly about classified missions, I could lose my clearance, my pension, everything. Emily was already typing on her phone. I'm a lawyer, remember? Let me make some calls. There are ways to handle this that keep you on the right side of regulations, while still letting you tell your story. The phone call started around 10. First a journalist from Military Times who'd covered my retirement 5 years earlier. Then a producer from a podcast about military aviation. Then, surprisingly, Marcus Hayes himself, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan. His voice was exactly what I'd expected. Measured, controlled, carrying authority earned through experience. I hope I'm not overstepping. Not at all, and it's just Rebecca now, I'm retired. You're never just anything, ma'am. I've spent 13 years telling people about what you did. I'd like to tell them who you are, if you'll allow it. We talked for an hour. He filled in details I'd never known. How close Neptune team had been to being overrun. How one of his men had been hit and was bleeding out. How they'd said their goodbyes to each other in whispers, while waiting for extraction that they didn't think would come. Then we heard your cannon. Sounded like the voice of God. And your call on the radio, Neptune team, this is Steel Phoenix, I'm coming in. Daniel Rodriguez started crying. Hard men, all of us. And we cried because we knew someone cared enough to try. His voice went rough. When we found out later that you'd flown past minimum fuel, that you'd broken 6 regulations to stay, that meant everything. It meant we were worth saving, worth the risk. Do you understand? You told 8 men that their lives mattered more than rules. That's a gift we've carried ever since. I didn't know what to say to that. 13 years later, and I still didn't have words for what that night had meant to me either. I couldn't leave you there. Couldn't? I know, that's why I've spent 13 years trying to live up to what you showed us. He paused. The video that's going around, is that real? Your cousin really said those things? Every word. Jesus. A longer pause. How long has he been doing that? Since we were kids, in one form or another. And you never corrected him? Never set the record straight? I thought I was being kind. Marcus's laugh was bitter. Kindness and doormat aren't the same thing, ma'am. Sounds like he needed someone to correct him about 20 years ago. Then more gently. My offer stands. If you want to tell your story publicly, I'll back you up. I'll verify every detail I'm cleared to verify. The SEAL community owes you, and we don't forget our debts. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. Emily appeared in the doorway. I talked to a military lawyer who specializes in this stuff. You can discuss the mission in general terms, the fact that you flew close air support, that you helped extract a SEAL team under fire. You can't name specific locations, tactics, or people without clearance, but you can tell your story. Do I want to, though? The question came out more plaintive than I'd intended. I've spent my whole life being quiet. It feels wrong to suddenly start broadcasting. Emily sat across from me. Mom, I love you, but you need to understand something. Your silence didn't protect Tyler. It enabled him. And it taught me and Hannah that we should make ourselves small too, that accomplishment should be hidden, that women need to apologize for being good at things. Her eyes were fierce. I'm a lawyer at a major firm. I'm good at my job. And for years I downplayed that, made jokes about how it's just contracts or boring corporate stuff, because that's what you taught me to do. The words hit like ice water. I never meant... I know you didn't, but intention isn't the same as impact. She reached across the table, took my hand. Tell your story, not for revenge, not to hurt Tyler, but because it's true, because it matters. Because there are other women out there making themselves small, thinking that's what they're supposed to do. Show them different. Monday morning I got a call from Admiral Carson. Rebecca, I went to see Tyler yesterday. I need you to hear something. He put me on speaker. Tyler's voice came through, thick with emotion I couldn't name. Aunt Rebecca, Dad told me more about what happened in Afghanistan, about the mission. I didn't know. I didn't understand. A pause, breathing. I'm not calling to make excuses. I'm calling because Dad said I need to really grasp what I've been doing, not just the surface stuff, the jokes and comments, but the underlying damage. I waited, not sure where this was going. I've been jealous of you my whole life. The words came faster now, like he was afraid he'd lose courage if he slowed down. You were always quiet, never trying to compete or show off, but you were achieving everything I couldn't. And instead of dealing with my own failures, I told myself your successes didn't count, that flying wasn't real combat, that you weren't really serving. His voice broke. But you were. You were doing exactly what I wanted to do and couldn't. You were being the kind of person Dad respects, and I hated you for it. The admission hung in the air between us. Admiral Carson's voice came back. I'm sitting here with him now. This isn't a performance. He's been crying for 2 days straight, barely eating. The reality of what he's done is hitting him, and it's hitting hard. I should have felt vindicated. 30 years of small cruelties, finally acknowledged. But instead, I just felt tired and sad. Tyler, I need you to understand something. I didn't stay quiet about my career to protect you. I stayed quiet because I'd internalized the same message you'd been sending, that my accomplishments weren't worth talking about, that I should be grateful for what I had and not ask for more. You didn't create that conditioning, but you reinforced it every chance you got. I know, and I'm so sorry. Let me finish. My voice was harder now. An apology isn't enough. Words are easy. What matters is change. You need to figure out who you are when you're not tearing someone else down. You need to build a life you're proud of that doesn't require diminishing anyone else. Can you do that? Silence, then small and broken. I don't know, I want to try. Then try. Get therapy. Do the work. Figure out why you spent 30 years needing to hurt me. And when you have answers, real answers, not just I was jealous, we can talk again. I hung up before either of them could respond. My hands were shaking. Emily appeared from the hallway where she'd been obviously listening. That was brutal. It needed to be. I looked at my daughter. I'm done making things easier for people who make things harder for me. The week passed in a blur. The video kept spreading, picked up by larger accounts, shared in military communities, in feminist forums, and aviation groups. People started digging into my service record, the parts that were public anyway. Photos surfaced from my retirement ceremony, showing the rows of ribbons on my chest. Someone found an old article from Airman magazine featuring me as one of the early female combat pilots. Another person unearthed a podcast interview I'd done years ago, where I'd talked in vague terms about the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated field. The narrative began to solidify. A decorated combat pilot, quietly serving for 3 decades, dismissed by her own family. It had everything the internet loved: underdog story, family drama, military heroism, feminist angle. And because I'd stayed mostly silent, people filled in the blanks with their own assumptions, some true, many wildly exaggerated. Marcus Hayes went public with his part of the story. He gave an interview to a military podcast where he talked about the helmet extraction in general terms, confirming that Steel Phoenix had saved his team and that he'd spent 13 years trying to identify the pilot. I finally know who she is, and she's everything we imagined. Professional, humble, exactly the kind of person you want when your life is on the line. The interview went viral. Suddenly, I wasn't just Rebecca Morgan, retired pilot. I was Steel Phoenix, hero, legend. The disconnect between those two identities made me dizzy. Emily fielded interview requests, dozens of them from outlets big and small. We turned down most, but she convinced me to say yes to a few. You need to control your own narrative, Mom. If you don't tell your story, other people will tell it for you, and they'll get it wrong. The first interview was with a reporter from NPR, recorded in my parents' living room. She was younger than me, mid-30s maybe, with intelligent eyes and questions that cut deeper than I'd expected. You stayed quiet about your accomplishments for nearly 3 decades. Why? I'd prepared for this question, rehearsed answers with Emily, But sitting there with the recorder running, the prepared answers felt false. I thought humility meant silence. I thought being good at my job should be enough, that I didn't need external validation. But looking back, I think I was afraid. Afraid of being called arrogant. Afraid of making waves. Afraid of being too much. Too much for whom? For everyone. My family, my colleagues, society. Women in the military already face so much scrutiny. I didn't want to add to it by seeming like I was showing off or demanding special treatment. So I made myself small. I let people underestimate me because that felt safer than insisting they see me clearly. And your cousin? Why did you tolerate his behavior? This was harder. Tyler was struggling. He grew up in the shadow of a father who was literally a legend. Those are impossible shoes to fill. I saw his pain, and I thought my silence would ease it. I thought if I didn't compete for attention or recognition, maybe it would be easier for him to find his own path. I looked directly at the recorder. I was wrong. My silence didn't help him. It enabled him to avoid facing his own insecurity. And it taught my daughters that women should hide their light. That's not a lesson I want to pass on. The interview ran 2 weeks later. My phone exploded with messages. Supportive, critical, curious. People I hadn't spoken to in decades reached out. The Air Force Public Affairs Office called to see if I needed media training. Marcus Hayes sent a simple text. Well done. But the message that mattered most came from Hannah. Mom, one of my colleagues just told me she's been hiding that she got promoted because she didn't want her male peers to feel bad. We talked for an hour about your interview. You're changing things. Keep going. 3 weeks after the birthday party, I flew to Norfolk, Virginia to meet Neptune team. Marcus had organized a reunion specifically, so I could meet all 8 men whose lives had intersected with mine for a few crucial minutes 13 years ago. They gathered at a bar that catered to veterans, walls covered with unit patches and photos of men and women in uniform. Marcus saw me first, stood from a table in the back. He was shorter than I'd imagined, compact and muscular with graying hair, and the kind of scars you get from a career of calculated risks. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan. Rebecca, please. He hugged me, brief but fierce, then stepped back. Everyone, this is her. This is Steel Phoenix. The other 7 men stood. Daniel Rodriguez, the sniper, tall and lean with careful eyes. James Cooper, the medic, broad-shouldered with gentle hands. Ryan Mitchell, communications specialist, now sporting a beard and glasses. I met each of them, shook hands that gripped mine with reverence that made me uncomfortable. These were elite warriors, the kind of men who'd done things I could only imagine. And they were treating me like I'd done something special. We brought something for you. Marcus pulled out a photo album, worn at the edges. After that night, after we all got home safe, we made a pact. Every major life event, every milestone, we'd document it because none of it would exist without you. I opened the album. Wedding photos. 3 of the men had gotten married in the years after Helmand. Birth announcements. 8 children between them. Graduations, baptisms, first days of school. Ryan's medical degree. James's service dog training certification. Daniel's daughter's soccer team photo. Every page was a life that wouldn't have been lived, a moment that wouldn't have existed. 23 lives. Marcus's voice was quiet. That's the count now. The 8 of us, plus our wives or partners, plus our children. 23 people who are here, who are alive and laughing and growing, because you made a choice 13 years ago. My hands shook holding the album. I'd known abstractly that I'd saved 8 men, but seeing it made concrete. The children with their gap-toothed smiles, the wedding photos full of joy, the normal, beautiful, mundane moments that make up a life. It broke something open in my chest. I didn't do it for this. My voice came out rough. I didn't even think about aftermath. I just knew I couldn't leave you there. We know. Daniel Rodriguez leaned forward. That's what makes it matter. You didn't calculate cost-benefit or think about recognition. You just saw people who needed help, and you helped. That kind of instinctive humanity, that's rare. We talked for hours. They told me about that night from their perspective. The growing certainty they were going to die, the prayers some of them said, the final messages they tried to record on their phones for families they didn't think they'd see again. Then the sound of my cannon, the impossible relief of my voice on the radio. We thought you were a guardian angel, James said. Literally. Thought we died, and that was the sound of heaven's gates. They asked about my life, my career, my family. I told them about David, about my daughters, about the 30 years of service that had defined me. I even told them about Tyler, about the pattern of dismissal that had culminated in the birthday party video. That's on him, not you. Ryan's voice was firm. You don't owe anyone permission to diminish you. Not family, not anyone. As the evening wound down, Marcus pulled me aside. There's something else I want to show you. He led me to a private room in the back of the bar. On the wall was a plaque, clearly new, brass gleaming. It read, "In honor of Steel Phoenix, call sign of Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Morgan, USAF, retired, who on September 14, 2010, flew into enemy fire to save 8 members of Neptune team. Her courage under fire exemplifies the highest traditions of military service. We are here because she chose to stay." Below that, 8 signatures. We commissioned this for the SEAL Museum, Marcus explained, but we wanted you to see it first. Your name will hang there alongside every other person who's made a difference in our community. You're part of our history now. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The weight of their gratitude, the reality of what I'd done and what it had meant, it was too much to process standing in a back room of a bar in Norfolk. Marcus seemed to understand. He just put a hand on my shoulder and waited until I could function again. Thank you seemed inadequate. You would have done the same, felt dismissive. So I just nodded, trusting he'd understand what I couldn't articulate. When I got back to Colorado, there was a letter waiting from Tyler. Actual paper. Handwritten in cramped script that showed how hard the writing had been. "Dear Rebecca," it began. "I've been in therapy 3 times a week since the party. My therapist says I need to understand the root causes of my behavior before I can really apologize. So here's what I've learned. I spent my whole life trying to be my father and hating myself for failing. You succeeded in ways I couldn't, and instead of celebrating that or learning from it, I tried to diminish your success so my failure felt less significant. That's cowardice, and I'm ashamed of it. But it goes deeper. I used you as a target because you were safe. You wouldn't fight back. You wouldn't make a scene. You'd just take it and smile and move on. I'm not saying that to blame you. Your kindness isn't weakness, no matter what I implied. I'm saying it because I need to acknowledge that I chose the safest target, not the most deserving one. I bullied you because I could, not because you deserved it. My therapist asked me what I'd lost by tearing you down all those years. I've been thinking about that question for days. I lost a relationship with an incredible person. I lost the chance to learn from someone who exemplifies the values my father tried to teach me. I lost my own integrity, and I taught everyone around me, including my wife, that I'm the kind of man who punches down when he feels insecure. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to try to make amends. But I needed you to know that I'm working on myself. Really working, not just going through motions. Because you were right. Words are easy. Change is hard. But I'm doing the hard thing. Your cousin Tyler. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or self-pity. There was some... It's hard to write about personal growth without sounding self-absorbed, but underneath the awkward phrasing, I sensed genuine effort. He was trying. Whether he'd succeed was another question, but he was trying. I didn't write back immediately. Instead, I tucked the letter into my desk drawer next to David's last note and the challenge coin from Neptune team. Evidence of lives intersecting, of choices made, and their consequences rippling forward. I'd respond eventually, when I'd figured out what I wanted to say. But for now, I let it sit. Tyler had spent 30 years making me respond on his timeline, react to his provocations. He could wait for me to be ready. The autumn brought unexpected developments. A publisher reached out about writing a memoir. A documentary filmmaker wanted to profile early female combat pilots, with my story as the centerpiece. The Air Force asked if I'd be willing to speak at the Academy graduation, sharing my experience with the next generation of pilots. Each opportunity felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold. Emily helped me navigate the business side, contracts and negotiations, and protecting my rights. Hannah helped me process the emotional side, reminding me that accepting recognition didn't make me arrogant, that telling my story could genuinely help others. My parents, understanding more now about what I'd done and what I'd sacrificed, became my biggest cheerleaders. But the most surprising support came from Admiral Carson. James called me regularly, checking in, sharing his own regrets about how he'd parented Tyler. I taught him that worth comes from accomplishment, from living up to impossible standards. I didn't teach him that worth is inherent, that he had value just by being. So he spent his life trying to achieve his way into maturity instead of growing into it naturally. You can't blame yourself for everything Tyler became. No, but I can acknowledge my part in it, and I can do better going forward. A pause. I've been talking to him about working with a veterans nonprofit. He's good with people when he's not trying to prove himself. Maybe if he channels that into actually helping others instead of performing helpfulness, he'll find something real. October brought the birthday that mattered, my 59th. My daughters flew in to celebrate. We'd planned a quiet dinner, just the four of us, if you counted my mother who'd insisted on cooking. But when I arrived at my parents' house, there were more cars than expected in the driveway. Inside, waiting in the living room, Neptune team, all 8 of them, some with wives and children. They'd flown in from across the country without telling me. "We missed your 58th because we didn't know who you were," Marcus explained. "We're not missing another one." The evening that followed was pure joy. Children running through the house the way Emily and Hannah once had. Neptune team trading stories with my father about engineering and aviation. My mother in her element, feeding warriors who ate like they were still on deployment. And in the center of it all, me, finally visible in the way I'd never let myself be before. Daniel Rodriguez's daughter, Emma, attached herself to me early in the evening. She was 12, all curiosity and confidence. "Mrs. Morgan, my dad says you saved his life before I was born." I nodded. "He tells me about it all the time, says I exist because you're brave." How to respond to that? How to tell this bright-eyed child that her existence wasn't a burden but a gift? That knowing she was alive because of choices I'd made gave those choices meaning beyond mission parameters and strategic objectives. "Your dad is pretty brave himself. He's the one who was on the ground, in danger. I was just providing support from the air." She shook her head with the certainty of youth. "No. He says you could have left. You were supposed to leave. But you stayed because it was right." She looked at me with an intensity that reminded me of her father. I think that's what brave means. Doing what's right even when it's scary and breaks the rules. Out of the mouths of children. Truth delivered without packaging or pretense. That's exactly what brave means, Emma. And the world needs more people like you who understand that. Later, after the cake had been served and Emma was showing Hannah her collection of airplane photos on a tablet, Marcus found me on the porch. "This has been good for them," he gestured to his teammates inside, "giving them a chance to say thank you to your face, not just to a call sign or a legend. It's been good for me too, seeing what came after, who you all became." I watched Ryan Mitchell through the window, holding his youngest son, making the baby laugh. I didn't have a sense of legacy before. I flew missions, came home, flew more missions. It was just work. Important work, but still just work. And now I see the ripples. The lives that continued because of one night. It makes it mean something beyond the tactical. Marcus leaned against the railing. "Can I ask you something personal about your cousin?" I braced myself. "Go ahead. Do you think he can change? Really change, not just perform change?" "I don't know. He's trying, but trying and succeeding aren't the same thing." "Why?" "Because I've been where he is. Not the jealousy part, but the part where you realize you've built your identity on sand. I had a rough few years after I got out of the Navy. Drank too much, pushed people away, couldn't figure out who I was when I wasn't a SEAL. I needed people to be patient with me while I figured it out. But I also needed consequences. Needed to understand that patience didn't mean acceptance of bad behavior." He looked at me directly. "You're being patient with Tyler by not writing him off completely. But you're also holding firm on consequences, that he needs to do real work before you'll engage fully. That's the right balance. Don't let anyone tell you you're being too hard on him. You're being exactly as hard as necessary." The validation from someone who'd faced similar struggles meant more than I could express. Thank you. I needed to hear that. We all need to hear that sometimes, that we're not crazy for having standards, that boundaries aren't cruelty. He smiled. You spent 30 years being too accommodating. Little late to worry about being too harsh now. November brought a call from Tyler. Not Admiral Carson putting him on speaker, not a mediated conversation. Just Tyler, asking if we could meet in person. I've been doing the work, like you said. I want to show you, not just tell you. Would you be willing to come to Virginia, or I can come to you, whatever works? I thought about it for 2 days, talked it through with my daughters, with my therapist. Yes, I'd started seeing someone too, processing decades of making myself small. Everyone had opinions, but the decision was mine. I'll come to Virginia, but we're meeting in a public place, and I'm bringing Emily. Whatever you need. Thank you for giving me a chance. We met at a coffee shop in Arlington, neutral ground near where Tyler worked at a new gym. He looked different, thinner, more tired, but somehow more present, like he'd shed a costume and was learning to exist in his actual skin. Emily sat at a nearby table, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give us space. Tyler ordered tea with shaking hands. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. No point in pretending otherwise. But you've put in months of work. That earned you this conversation. He nodded, accepting that. I don't have excuses prepared. My therapist said trying to explain away 30 years of bad behavior is just another form of avoiding responsibility. So I'll just say it. I treated you terribly because I was insecure and you were an easy target. That's on me, not on you. Okay. I waited for the rest, the part where he'd ask for something. I'm working at a nonprofit now. Veterans services, helping guys transition out of the military. My dad helped me get the interview, but I got the job on my own. Pride crept into his voice, tentative but real. I'm good at it. Turns out listening to people and helping them navigate bureaucracy is something I can actually do. It's not glamorous or hero stuff, but it matters, and it's mine. And that's good, Tyler, really. He took a breath. I also need to tell you that I'm working with a group that does intervention with men who struggle with jealousy and competition. Men like me who tear down other people to feel better about themselves. I share my story. Without using your name, you don't need to be part of my redemption tour, about how I spent decades trying to diminish someone I should have been celebrating. It helps other guys see themselves in my mistakes. This was new, unexpected. Tyler using his failure as teaching tool. How does that feel? Being public about your worst behavior? Humiliating. Necessary. Both. He met my eyes for the first time. The guys in that group, they hear my story and they see themselves. See how their insecurity is hurting people they claim to love. If my screw-up can help them change before they waste 30 years like I did, then maybe it's worth something. We talked for an hour. He told me about his work, about his marriage. Lisa had given him an ultimatum, change or divorce, and he'd chosen change. About his relationship with his father, which was slowly rebuilding on foundations of honesty instead of expectation. He asked about my life, and for the first time I told him, really told him, about missions I'd flown, decisions I'd made, the weight of command and the satisfaction of training pilots who went on to save lives themselves. He listened without interrupting, without trying to minimize or redirect, just listened with full attention, the way he should have been listening for 3 decades. When we finally stood to leave, he didn't try to hug me, just offered his hand. Thank you for this, for giving me a chance to show you I'm trying. I shook his hand, felt calluses that spoke of physical work alongside the emotional labor. Keep trying, not for me, for yourself, because the person you're becoming is worth more than the person you were. Outside, Emily looped her arm through mine. How do you feel? Tired, but okay, he's doing the work. Do you trust it'll last? I thought about that as we walked to the car. Trust wasn't binary, it was a spectrum, rebuilt slowly through consistent action. I trust that he's trying right now. Whether he'll keep trying when it gets harder, when the novelty wears off, when therapy feels like too much work, that remains to be seen. But he's earned probation, if not pardon. That's fair. Emily squeezed my arm. I'm proud of you, Mom, for holding your boundary but staying open to possibility. That's harder than just cutting him off would have been. It was harder, but David had written in his letter, "Don't let anyone make you feel small." He hadn't written, "Never give anyone a second chance." There was space between those two imperatives, room for both dignity and grace. I was learning to live in that space. December arrived with the first real snow Colorado had seen in 2 years. I spent the month finishing a manuscript, part memoir, part meditation on service and silence, and finding your voice. The writing was harder than flying ever was. Combat had clear objectives. Writing required excavating truth from layers of habit and self-protection, required admitting things I'd barely acknowledged to myself. But I did it. Finished the first draft on Christmas Eve, sent it to my editor with trembling hands. Emily and Hannah came for the holiday, both of them reading chapters and offering feedback. "This is going to help people, Mom," Hannah said, curled up in an armchair with pages covered in her notes. Women who've been hiding their competence, men who've been tearing others down out of insecurity, they need to read this. Christmas morning, we video called my parents, then Admiral Carson and Aunt Catherine. James looked older on the screen, mortality creeping in at the edges, but his voice was strong. "Rebecca, I wanted you to know, Tyler's been consistent. 6 months now of real work. I'm starting to believe it might stick. I hope so, for his sake. Mine too. I'd like to have a relationship with my son that isn't built on disappointment, his or mine." He paused. "And I want you to know, I'm proud to call you family. Proud that my niece is the person who best exemplifies the values I tried to teach, even if you learned them despite me, not because of me." After we hung up, I sat with that for a long time. The complexity of families, how we wound and heal each other in continuous cycles. How redemption was possible but not guaranteed. How grace was a choice you made over and over, not a single decision that settled everything. New Year's Eve, alone in my house with a glass of wine and the fire crackling, I thought about the year that had passed. 12 months since I'd been invisible, dismissed, reduced to footnote. 12 months of standing up, speaking out, claiming space I'd spent a lifetime pretending not to need. It hadn't been comfortable. Growth never is. But it had been necessary, this shedding of old skin that no longer fit. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Hayes. "Happy New Year, Rebecca. Still grateful you stayed." I smiled, typed back, "Happy New Year. Grateful you gave me reason to." Life didn't require grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it just required showing up, doing your job, and letting the aftermath speak for itself. I'd spent 13 years not knowing the full impact of one decision. Now I knew. Now I carried that knowledge forward into whatever came next. More visible, more vocal, more willing to take up space. Steel Phoenix, they'd called me, a bird that rises from fire. But I hadn't risen from anything. I'd always been here, always been flying. I just finally learned to let people see me do it. January brought the publisher's contract, and with it, a deadline that made my chest tight. 6 months to turn rough manuscript into publishable memoir. My editor, Carmen Rodriguez, called from New York with enthusiasm that felt foreign after years of military understatement. "Rebecca, this is important. Your story, the way you're telling it, women need this. Hell, everyone needs this. But we need to dig deeper. The Afghanistan mission is compelling, but it's the why that matters. Why did you stay silent? What changed? How do we make readers understand the cost of invisibility?" I spent February in my home office, curtains drawn against Colorado snow, excavating memories I'd buried under layers of discipline and duty. Writing about the birthday party was easy, recent, raw, the details still sharp. But going back further, to the first time Tyler dismissed me, to the moment I decided silence was safer than assertion, to all the small deaths that came from making myself disappear. That required opening doors I'd nailed shut. Hannah flew out for a long weekend in early March. She found me at my desk at 2 a.m, surrounded by coffee cups and crumpled paper, crying over a paragraph about David's death. "Mom, you need to sleep." Her hand on my shoulder, warm and grounding. "The book will still be here tomorrow." I can't capture it. What it felt like to lose him right when I was finally understanding what he'd been trying to tell me. How he spent our whole marriage encouraging me to be visible, and I didn't listen until he was gone. My voice cracked. He deserved better than my stubbornness. Hannah pulled up a chair. "He loved you exactly as you were, stubbornness included, and he'd be proud of what you're doing now. Not because you finally listened, but because you're teaching others what took you so long to learn. She read the paragraph I'd been fighting with. This is good, Mom. It's honest. That's what matters. The manuscript grew, page by page, word by word. I wrote about flying, about the physics of keeping metal airborne, and the calculus of combat decisions. I wrote about being a woman in spaces designed for men, about the extra weight of proving yourself over and over, about the exhaustion of being simultaneously invisible and hypervisible depending on what served others' narratives. I wrote about Tyler, trying to be fair while being truthful, trying to explain without excusing. And I wrote about the night in Helmand. Carmen wanted me to make it dramatic, to heighten the danger and emphasize my heroism. But I pushed back. It wasn't dramatic in the moment. It was calculations and procedures and pushing past fear because people needed help. If I make it sound like an action movie, I'm lying about what real courage looks like. Real courage is boring. It's just doing the next right thing even when you're terrified. She eventually agreed, and that chapter became the heart of the book. Not because of explosions or near-death escapes, but because I wrote about the choice itself, the moment between hearing Neptune team's call and deciding to respond, the space where duty and humanity intersected, where I stopped being Lieutenant Colonel Morgan following orders and became simply a person who couldn't abandon others to darkness. April brought spring, and with it, an invitation that stopped me cold. The Air Force Academy wanted me to speak at graduation, to address the newest class of officers about service and integrity and finding your voice. I held the formal letter in shaking hands. They want me to what? Emily, visiting for the week, read over my shoulder. This is huge, Mom. Graduation speaker at the Academy? That's not just honor. That's influence. You'll be speaking to over 1,000 new officers, setting the tone for how they think about service. I can't. I'm not a speechwriter, not a public speaker. I fly planes, flew planes, past tense. You're also a writer now, apparently. She gestured to my desk where 200 pages of manuscript sat in neat stacks. And you've done a dozen interviews. You've found your voice. Now use it where it matters most. I accepted, then immediately regretted it. What did I have to say to these bright-faced 22-year-olds who just spent 4 years being molded into leaders? What wisdom could I offer that their instructors hadn't already drilled into them? Carmen had an answer. Tell them what you told me, that courage isn't always loud, that service sometimes means doing the right thing when no one's watching, that integrity includes not letting others diminish you. You lived that for 30 years. Share it. I drafted the speech in May, writing and rewriting until Emily threatened to hide my laptop. The words needed to be perfect, inspiring without being preachy, honest without being cynical, personal without being self-absorbed. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, then in front of my daughters, then in a conference call with Marcus Hayes, who offered military perspective. You're overthinking it, he finally told me. Just tell them what you wish someone had told you when you graduated. The rest will follow. What I wish someone had told me. I sat with that for a long time, thinking back to 23-year-old me in that same uniform, walking across that same stage, believing I knew what service meant. What would I tell her if I could reach back through time? I'd tell her that making yourself small doesn't make others larger, that silence is not always strength, that you can be both humble and visible, that the people who matter will celebrate your success, not resent it, that your light doesn't diminish anyone else's, it just makes the world brighter. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for late May. I flew to Colorado Springs 2 days early to meet with Academy leadership and tour the campus that had shaped my life. Walking those halls again, 35 years after I'd first arrived as a terrified cadet, felt like visiting a museum of my own history. The current superintendent, Major General Patricia Chen, a former fighter pilot herself, met me in her office with coffee and genuine warmth. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan, this is an honor. Your story has been making waves in the Air Force community. A lot of people are finally understanding what early female combat pilots faced. I didn't do anything special, I just did my job. She smiled, not unkind. That's exactly the mentality we're trying to change. Doing your job excellently, under conditions that were actively hostile to your presence, while maintaining integrity and humility, that is special. And it's what we want our cadets to emulate. She leaned forward. Your speech tomorrow. I've read the draft you sent. It's good, but I want you to add something. Ma'am? Tell them about the cost. not just the glory of the mission or the satisfaction of finally being recognized. Tell them what it cost you to stay silent, what it cost your family, what it cost other women who learned from your example that hiding was safer than shining. They need to understand that choices have consequences beyond the moment. The request settled into my chest like weight. She was right. I'd written a good speech about courage and visibility, but I'd softened the hard parts. I'd made it sound like the only victim of my silence was me. But Emily's words echoed. Your silence taught me and Hannah that we should make ourselves small too. I rewrote the ending that night in my hotel room, pushing past midnight to find the words that captured the full truth. The cost of invisibility wasn't just personal, it was generational. Every time I let Tyler diminish me, I taught my daughters that women should accept diminishment. Every time I downplayed my accomplishments, I reinforced the message that female achievement should be apologetic. Every year I stayed silent, I made it easier for the next woman to think silence was required. Graduation day dawned clear and perfect, Colorado blue sky stretching forever. I stood backstage in my service dress uniform, rows of ribbons and the silver oak leaves I'd worn for the last years of my career. My hands shook. This was worse than combat. At least in combat, I knew what I was doing. General Chen appeared at my side. Breathe. They're going to love you. And even if they don't, you'll have said what needs saying. She paused. For what it's worth, I'm grateful you're doing this. I graduated in the early 90s, just a few years after you. I watched how women like you navigated impossible situations with grace. It made my path easier. Now you're making the path easier for the ones coming up behind us. That matters. The ceremony began with pomp and tradition. The March of Cadets, the national anthem, speeches from military leadership and government officials. Then General Chen introduced me, listing accomplishments that sounded like someone else's life when spoken aloud. The audience applauded. Over 1,000 faces looked up at me, young and earnest and hopeful. I gripped the podium, took a breath, and began. Graduates of the Air Force Academy class of 2024, faculty, families, honored guests, I stand before you today not because I'm special, but because I finally stopped pretending I wasn't. For most of my 32-year career, I made myself invisible. I flew combat missions, saved lives, broke barriers, and then I went home and let my family treat me like I had a desk job. I thought humility meant silence. I thought being good at my work was enough. I was wrong. The audience was silent, attentive. I could see parents in the stands, some taking notes, others leaning forward. In September 2010, I made a decision that defined my career. 8 Navy SEALs were trapped in an Afghan valley, surrounded by enemy forces, running out of time. My fuel was critically low. Regulations required me to return to base. I stayed instead. I broke protocol, risked my aircraft, flew into enemy fire to clear an extraction corridor. All 8 men survived. I thought that was the end of the story. I paused, found the faces of Emily and Hannah in the crowd, drew strength from them. But it wasn't, because for the next 13 years I never told anyone what I'd done, not my family, not my children. I let my cousin spend 3 decades mocking my service because I thought my silence would protect him from his own insecurity. I thought making myself small would make space for others to grow. Instead, I taught everyone around me, especially my daughters, that women should hide their accomplishments, that taking up space is selfish, that we should be grateful for whatever crumbs of recognition were offered. The silence had quality now, a kind of held breath. You're graduating today into a world that will test you in ways your instructors can't simulate. Some of those tests will be combat, decisions made in split seconds with lives on the line. But others will be quieter, more insidious. Someone will take credit for your work. Someone will dismiss your expertise. Someone will tell you that speaking up makes you difficult, that asserting yourself makes you arrogant. And you'll have to choose, stay silent and keep the peace, or speak up and risk being labeled. I looked directly at the female cadets scattered through the graduating class, roughly 20% of the total. But this message was for everyone. Here's what I wish someone had told me 35 years ago when I sat where you're sitting. Your silence doesn't protect anyone. It doesn't make insecure people more secure. It doesn't preserve relationships worth preserving. It just teaches people that you can be dismissed, diminished, erased from your own story. And every time you accept that dismissal, you make it easier for them to dismiss the next person and the next, until whole generations of talent are invisible. My voice strengthened, decades of frustration channeling into clarity. This isn't about arrogance or ego. This isn't about demanding recognition you haven't earned. You've earned everything. You graduated from one of the finest military academies in the world. You've proven your competence, your dedication, your capability. Now prove your integrity by refusing to hide your light. Be excellent at your work, yes, but also be visible. Take up the space you've earned. Let people see what competence looks like, what leadership looks like, what service looks like, especially when it looks different from what they expected. I could see some cadets nodding, others taking notes, a few wiping at their eyes. The night I stayed in Helmand Province, I wasn't thinking about legacy or recognition. I was thinking about 8 men who wanted to go home to their families. But the legacy turned out to be bigger than that mission. 23 people exist today. Those 8 men, their wives and partners, their children. Because I made a choice. That's 23 lives, 23 futures, 23 chances to make the world better. That's what service means. Not the medals or the call signs or the stories told afterward, but the ripples, the consequences that extend far beyond the moment of action. The speech was almost over. I could feel it building toward the closing, toward the message I needed to leave them with. You will face moments in your career where you have to choose between following protocol and doing what's right, between staying safe and helping others, between keeping silent and speaking truth. I can't tell you which choice to make. That's between you and your conscience and your training. But I can tell you this. Whatever choice you make, own it. Don't do brave things and then pretend they were ordinary. Don't achieve excellence and then apologize for it. Don't save lives and then let others take credit. Your service matters. Your sacrifice matters. Your story matters. Don't ever let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. I stepped back from the podium. The silence held for 1 heartbeat, 2, then shattered into applause that rolled over me like a wave. The cadets stood, then the families, then the faculty. I stood there taking it in, this validation I'd never sought but was learning to accept. General Chen shook my hand as I left the stage. That was exactly what they needed to hear. Thank you. But the real feedback came later, during the reception, when young officers approached me with stories of their own silences, their own struggles with visibility and voice. A female lieutenant, fresh-faced and determined. "Ma'am, I've been in 3 years and I already feel it. The pressure to downplay what I know, to let male colleagues speak over me in briefings, to be grateful when my ideas are acknowledged. Hearing you name it, it helps. It makes me feel less crazy." A male captain, older, carrying weight in his expression. "I've done what your cousin did. Not as long, not as deliberately, but I've torn people down when I felt insecure. Your speech made me realize I need to do better, so thank you for the honesty." Conversation after conversation, each one revealing how my story had touched something raw and necessary. This was the power of visibility, not self-aggrandizement, but permission. Permission for others to stop hiding, to speak up, to claim space they'd earned. Emily found me near the end of the reception, handed me a glass of water I desperately needed. "Mom, that was incredible. I've never been prouder." She hugged me tight. "And I'm sorry." I pulled back to look at her. "Sorry for what?" "For learning from you that I should hide my competence. For making jokes about my boring contract work instead of admitting I negotiate complex deals that save companies millions. For being 28 years old and still afraid to take up space." Her eyes were bright with tears. "But I'm done with that now. Because you showed me different." Hannah appeared on my other side. "Same. I'm done downplaying being a doctor. Done making myself small so men don't feel threatened. You taught me what not to do, and now you're teaching me what to do instead." We stood there, 3 generations of women learning to be visible together. This was the legacy that mattered, not the medals or the speeches or the recognition that came 3 decades late, but this, breaking cycles, changing patterns, teaching by example that there's strength in presence, power in voice, integrity in refusing to hide, June brought the finished manuscript to Carmen's desk and a new challenge to mine. Marcus Hayes called with unusual hesitation in his voice. Rebecca, Neptune team wants to do something, but we need your permission first. We want to organize a memorial dedication. For who? For the mission. September 14th will be 15 years since that night. We want to create a permanent memorial at the SEAL Museum. Your name, the date, what you did. A physical reminder that someone cared enough to break the rules when it mattered. But we won't do it without your blessing. 15 years. Half my daughter's lives ago, that night had happened. I'd flown into darkness and come out changed in ways I didn't understand until recently. What would this memorial look like? Small, tasteful, bronze plaque with your name and call sign, brief description of the mission, nothing classified. Maybe a photo of an A-10 if we can find a good one. It would hang in the Hall of Heroes alongside other significant air support missions. Your name would be there forever, teaching future generations about what it means to not leave people behind. Forever. My name in bronze, permanent and visible. No more hiding, no more letting others define my story. Yes, let's do it. You'll come for the dedication ceremony? I'll be there. Planning the ceremony filled the summer. Neptune team coordinated with the SEAL Museum, with Air Force Public Affairs, with my family. The dedication was set for September 14th, exactly 15 years after the mission. Media outlets requested interviews. The publisher moved my book's release date to coincide with the ceremony. Maximum impact, Carmen explained, though I suspected she just liked symmetry. Tyler called in late July. We'd been talking semi-regularly by then, carefully rebuilding something that wasn't friendship yet, but might become it. Becca, I saw the news about the memorial dedication. That's incredible. You must be proud. Proud and terrified in equal measure. I was in my backyard, phone tucked against my ear, watching clouds drift across Colorado sky. 15 years I've kept this quiet. Now it's going to be public forever. That's what you deserve. Recognition, permanence, truth. He paused. Would it be okay if Lisa and I came to the ceremony? I know I don't have a right to be there, but I'd like to witness this, if that's not too weird. My first instinct was refusal. This moment belonged to Neptune team, to my daughters, to the people who'd supported me. Tyler had spent most of his life undermining me. Why should he get to celebrate my vindication? But then I thought about what Marcus had said months ago, about needing both patience and consequences, about redemption being possible but not guaranteed. Tyler had been doing the work for over a year now. He'd changed jobs, committed to therapy, started helping other men unlearn toxic patterns. He wasn't the cousin who'd mocked me at the birthday party anymore. Or if he was also becoming someone else alongside that person. You can come, both of you, but Tyler, I know, I'll stay in the background. This isn't about me. It's about you finally getting what you should have had all along. That's not what I was going to say. I watched a hawk circle overhead, riding thermals with effortless grace. What I was going to say is, come as who you're becoming, not who you were. Come as someone who understands what that night meant and what my silence cost. Come as someone who's learned something. Can you do that? Yeah, I can do that. August brought my 60th birthday, and with it a quiet celebration at my parents' house. Just immediate family, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous year's party. My father had aged visibly, moving slower, forgetting words occasionally. Mortality hung in the air like humidity, unspoken but undeniable. My mother compensated by cooking enough food for an army, filling the silence with the language of care she'd always spoken most fluently. We ate dinner on the back porch, watching fireflies wink in the gathering dusk. Jack and Catherine were there, Jack's limp more pronounced, but his humor intact. Tyler and Lisa came late, bringing flowers and apology for traffic. The evening was gentle, easy, nothing like the landmine we'd all stepped on the year before. After cake, my father pulled out a box I recognized from my childhood. Found this in the attic last week. Thought you might want it. Inside were my old logbooks, the ones from academy training, from my first solo flight, from every mission I'd ever flown. I'd left them behind when I moved to Colorado. Hadn't looked at them in years. I opened the first logbook, saw my younger self's handwriting recording training flights in painstaking detail. September 12th, 1989. Solo flight T-38. Talon, 1.2 hours, 3 touch and goes. Instructor notes, Cadet Morgan demonstrates excellent stick control and situational awareness. I remembered that day, the terror and exhilaration of being alone in an aircraft for the first time, responsible for keeping metal and flesh airborne through skill and will. Flipping forward, I found my combat missions logged with the same precision. Iraq, Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan. Hundreds of hours in hostile airspace, thousands of decisions made at speed, countless lives affected by my actions or inaction. All of it recorded in cramped handwriting that grew neater with experience, more confident, more certain. I'd forgotten how much I flew. The words came out quiet, awed by the evidence of my own service. How many missions, how many hours, it's all here. It's all. Hannah leaned over my shoulder. That's your legacy, Mom. Every flight, every choice, every life saved, all documented, all real, all yours. The logbooks were coming with me to the ceremony. Physical proof that Steel Phoenix wasn't just a call sign or a story. It was 3 decades of showing up, doing the work, serving with excellence even when no one was watching. September arrived with autumn colors starting to touch the trees. I flew to Norfolk a week before the ceremony, wanting time to acclimate, to prepare, to steady myself for what was coming. Marcus picked me up at the airport, embracing me like the old friends we'd somehow become. Welcome back. Ready for this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He laughed. That's pretty much the definition of courage. The week before the ceremony was a blur of preparation and media. The museum wanted photos. The publisher wanted interview footage for marketing. The local news wanted a feature story. I did it all with Emily as my handler, Hannah as my therapist, and Marcus as my translator for military culture I'd been away from too long. But the important moments happened in quieter spaces. Dinner with Neptune team and their families at the same bar where we'd first reunited. Meeting Emma Torres again, now 15, and asking pointed questions about college and career paths, and whether she should join the military like her father. Walking through the SEAL Museum with Marcus, seeing the space where my name would hang forever. It's really happening. I stood in front of the empty wall space reserved for my plaque. Tomorrow, it would be filled with bronze and truth. 15 years of being invisible, and now I'm going to be literally written in stone. In bronze, technically. Marcus's smile was gentle. But yes, your name will be here long after both of us are gone. Future generations of warriors will see it and know someone cared enough to stay. That's immortality, Rebecca. That's mattering. The ceremony itself was scheduled for 10 in the morning, time to match the hour when Neptune team had made their distress call 15 years ago. Early enough to catch morning light, late enough that people could travel in. The museum had set up chairs outside, arranged in neat rows facing the building where the plaque would be unveiled. A podium, a sound system, American flag and Navy flag flanking the space. I arrived 2 hours early, unable to stay in the hotel, needing to be present in the space where my story would become permanent. The maintenance crew was still setting up, testing microphones, arranging flowers someone had donated. I walked the perimeter, breathing deep, reminding myself that I'd flown combat missions in hostile territory. Surely I could handle a dedication ceremony. My family arrived next. Emily and Hannah, my parents moving carefully with age, Jack and Catherine, Tyler and Lisa, hanging back like they weren't sure they belonged. Then Neptune team with their families, then Air Force officers I'd served with, then reporters and photographers and people I didn't recognize who'd come because the story had touched them somehow. By 9:30, over 200 people filled the chairs and spilled into standing room. More than had been at my retirement ceremony. More than had been at any single event in my life. All there to witness my name being carved into permanence. Marcus found me backstage, well, behind the building where speakers waited. You look terrified. That's good. Means you understand the weight of this. He handed me a bottle of water. Daniel is going to speak first. Tell the story from our perspective. Then General Chen is flying in to speak about your career. Then you. Then we unveil the plaque. Simple. Simple. Nothing about this was simple. The ceremony began with military precision. An honor guard presented the colors. Someone sang the national anthem, voice strong and sure. Then Daniel Rodriguez approached the podium, his daughter Emma standing with her mother in the front row. Daniel spoke about that night with detail I'd never heard from their perspective. How they'd been compromised, surrounded, watching their ammunition deplete with every magazine change. How they'd accepted they were going to die and started recording final messages to their families. How they'd heard my cannon before they heard my voice, that sound becoming synonymous with hope. We called Steel Phoenix a guardian angel. We thought it was metaphor, poetry born of adrenaline and relief. But standing here today, I understand we were right. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Morgan was our angel. Not supernatural, but superhuman. She chose to risk her life for strangers. She chose to break protocol because protocol didn't account for compassion. She chose to stay when every regulation said leave. And because of those choices, I'm standing here today. My daughter is sitting there. He pointed to Emma. My life, all of our lives, exist in the aftermath of her decision. He stepped back from the podium, and I saw tears on his face. This hard man who'd seen combat in places I'd only flown over. The weight of gratitude, still fresh after 15 years. General Chen spoke next, summarizing my career with authority and precision. The deployments, the missions, the leadership positions. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan represented the best of what the Air Force aspires to be. Technically proficient, tactically brilliant, ethically sound. She flew over 200 combat missions across 4 theaters. She trained 2 generations of pilots, many of whom went on to save lives themselves. She broke barriers as one of the first female combat pilots, doing so with such grace that she made the path easier for those who followed. Then it was my turn. I stood at the podium, looking at faces new and familiar, seeing my story reflected in their attention. The words I'd prepared felt inadequate, too small for the moment, but they were what I had, so I spoke them. 15 years ago tonight, I made a choice that I thought was simple. People needed help. I could provide it. The cost-benefit analysis was straightforward. Risk 1 life to save 8. The math worked. I paused, finding the thread of what I really wanted to say. But it wasn't simple, and it wasn't just about math, because service never is. Service is about seeing people, really seeing them, and deciding their lives matter enough to risk your own. It's about understanding that we're all connected, that someone else's tragedy could have been our tragedy in different circumstances, that there, but for the grace of God, go I. The audience was perfectly still, attentive in that way that tells you people are actually listening, not just being polite. I spent 13 years not talking about that night because I thought humility meant silence, but I was wrong. Humility doesn't mean hiding your light. It means understanding that your light isn't about you. It's about what you illuminate for others. It's about making the path visible for whoever comes behind you. And silence doesn't illuminate anything. It just makes it easier for others to pretend the path doesn't exist. I looked at Tyler, sitting near the back, Lisa's hand in his. He met my eyes, nodded slightly. Permission or acknowledgement, or maybe just recognition that we were both here. Both changed, both still becoming whatever we'd be next. The Men of Neptune team did me a great honor by tracking me down, by insisting I accept recognition I'd never sought. They taught me that impact isn't something you get to deny. You don't get to save lives and then claim it didn't matter. You don't get to change the world, even a small corner of it, and then pretend you're just like everyone else, because you're not. And that's okay. That's what service means. Becoming someone different, someone who's touched by the lives you've touched, who carries the weight and privilege of having mattered. The words were landing. I could feel it in the silence, in the way people leaned forward. This plaque that will hang behind me represents a single night, but really, it represents a principle. That people are worth staying for. That rules exist to serve humanity, not the other way around. That sometimes doing the right thing means breaking protocol, accepting risk, choosing compassion over compliance. I hope everyone who sees this plaque understands that. I hope it inspires someone someday to make their own choice to stay when leaving would be easier. Because that's how we save the world. Not all at once, not with grand gestures, but one choice at a time, one life at a time, one moment of courage that ripples forward into futures we'll never see. I stepped back. The applause came, but I barely heard it. Marcus was beside me, Emily on my other side, both of them anchoring me to reality, while emotion threatened to sweep me away. Then we turned to face the wall where a cloth covered my plaque, and Marcus counted down, 3, 2, 1, and the cloth fell away. Bronze gleaming in morning sunlight, my name, my rank, my call sign, the date. A brief description. Who flew into enemy fire to save 8 members of Neptune team, September 14th, 2010. Her courage under fire exemplifies the highest traditions of military service. And below that, in italics, we are here because she chose to stay. Permanent, visible, true. The reception afterward was chaos in the best way. People wanting photos, stories, autographs on copies of my book that Carmen had somehow arranged to have available for purchase. Neptune team families surrounding me, introducing children who carried life forward because their fathers had come home. Tyler approaching nervously, offering a handshake that turned into a hug when I opened my arms. Thank you for letting me be here, for letting me witness this. His voice was rough. I spent so long trying to make you small. And here you are, immortalized in bronze, exactly as big as you should have been all along. You're welcome, and Tyler, I held his shoulders, made him look at me. You're not who you were. Keep not being that person. Keep becoming whoever you're growing into. That's all any of us can do. Lisa appeared at his side, slipped her arm through his. He's trying. We both are. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like. Not tearing others down, but building them up, even when they don't deserve it. The afternoon stretched into evening. Media interviews, more photos, conversations with people whose lives had intersected with mine in ways I'd never known. A retired Air Force colonel who'd read about my career and wanted to tell me I'd inspired his daughter to become a pilot. A civilian teacher who'd shown her students the viral video and used it to teach lessons about bullying and redemption. A veteran struggling with PTSD who said my story reminded him that his service mattered, even though no one back home seemed to notice. Each conversation was a gift I hadn't known to ask for. Evidence that visibility created connection, that sharing truth built bridges, that my story belonged not just to me but to everyone it touched. As the sun set over Norfolk and the crowd thinned, I stood in front of my plaque with Marcus. Is this real? Did this actually happen? It happened. And it'll keep happening. Every person who walks through this museum from now until forever will see your name, will learn what you did, will carry that knowledge forward into their own choices. He bumped my shoulder gently. You're part of history now, Rebecca. No taking it back. I didn't want to take it back. Not anymore. Not after seeing what visibility could create. Not just recognition for me, but permission for others to stop hiding, to claim space, to believe their service and sacrifice and stories mattered enough to be told. The flight home the next day was quiet, contemplative. Emily and Hannah flew back with me, the 3 of us processing together what the ceremony had meant. That was one of the most powerful things I've ever witnessed, Hannah said, somewhere over Kansas. Watching all those people honor you, hearing the impact you've had. Mom, you changed the world. Not metaphorically, literally. 23 people exist because of you, and that's not even counting everyone you've inspired through your story. Emily nodded. And you're going to inspire more when the book comes out. Women who've been hiding their competence, men who've been tearing others down. They're all going to read your story and see themselves. That's going to change things. The book released 2 weeks later to reviews I was too nervous to read. Carmen assured me they were good. Publishers Weekly called it a masterclass in understated heroism and the cost of invisibility. But I couldn't bring myself to look. The work was done. I'd excavated every truth I could find, written it as honestly as possible, sent it into the world. What people made of it was beyond my control. But the emails started coming immediately. Hundreds, then thousands. Women thanking me for naming what they'd felt but couldn't articulate. Men apologizing for behavior they recognized in Tyler's story. Young people asking how to navigate careers while maintaining integrity. Veterans sharing their own stories of service and silence and slow recognition. Each email was overwhelming in its intimacy. Strangers trusting me with their pain, their growth, their hope. I tried to respond to as many as possible, but eventually I had to accept that I couldn't answer them all. The book had become bigger than me, its message carrying forward into spaces I'd never enter, touching lives I'd never meet. October brought an unexpected invitation. The president wanted to award me the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, the medal I'd been recommended for 15 years ago, but that had somehow never materialized through bureaucratic tangles and classification delays. The ceremony would be at the White House, formal and official, the kind of recognition I'd never imagined receiving. "You have to go," Emily insisted when I called to tell her. "This is presidential-level recognition. You can't turn that down." I could absolutely turn it down. I don't need a medal to validate what I did. It's not about needing validation. Her lawyer voice, precise and unarguable. It's about setting an example. How many young girls will see you receiving that medal and think, "I could do that"? How many women in the military will feel seen because you're being honored? This isn't just about you, Mom. It never has been. She was right. Again, my daughter was getting uncomfortably good at being right. The White House ceremony was scheduled for early November. My parents couldn't travel. My father's health had declined further, making long trips impossible. But Emily and Hannah came, and Jack and Catherine, and surprisingly Tyler. "I want to witness all of it," he explained when I questioned why he'd fly across the country for this. "Your full restoration. Everything I tried to prevent for 30 years. I want to see it completed, if that's okay." It was more than okay. It was healing in its way. Tyler bearing witness to my recognition, sitting in the audience at the White House, watching the President of the United States pin a medal on my chest and speak about courage and service and the importance of honoring those who serve regardless of gender. This was accountability lived out, not through punishment, but through presence. Tyler watching me be honored, being forced to confront the full magnitude of what he'd tried to diminish. The president's speech was brief but powerful. She spoke about the early female combat pilots, about the barriers they'd broken and the paths they'd cleared. She spoke about the Helmand mission specifically, about my choice to stay when regulations said leave. And she spoke about silence, about how many heroes go unrecognized because they don't speak up, don't demand acknowledgement, don't insist on being seen. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan represents a generation of service members who did extraordinary work without seeking extraordinary recognition. But today, we correct that oversight. Today, we say clearly, your service mattered, your sacrifice mattered, your courage mattered, and America honors you. She pinned the medal to my uniform, stepped back, saluted. I returned the salute, muscle memory and emotion combining into something that felt transcendent. The audience applauded, cameras flashed, and I stood there in the White House, wearing a medal I'd earned 15 years ago, finally visible in every possible way. The reception afterward was diplomatic, political, full of people I'd never met who wanted to thank me for my service. But the moment that mattered came in a quiet corner, when Tyler approached with tears on his face. "I'm sorry," his voice barely audible. "For every time I diminished this, for every joke, every dismissal, every moment I tried to make you small, I'm so sorry." I'd heard him apologize before, but this felt different. Witnessed by circumstance and weight, made real by contrast between his 30 years of mockery and this moment of ultimate recognition. "I know, and I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger takes energy I'd rather spend elsewhere. You've done the work to change. That matters." I touched his shoulder. "But Tyler, understand. This isn't about you. This ceremony, this medal, this moment. It's not your redemption arc. It's my recognition. Don't make it about your growth. Let it just be about my service." He nodded, understanding. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'll just be glad I was here to see it." That was enough. That was progress. Not perfect, but real. December brought us back to where we'd started. My parents' house for Christmas. But everything was different now. My father, frailer but proud, showing everyone the framed photo of me receiving the medal. My mother, crying happy tears every time someone congratulated her on raising such a remarkable daughter. Jack and Catherine, treating me with the respect I'd always deserved but never demanded. Tyler, quiet and helpful, no longer needing to be the center of attention, comfortable now in supporting roles. And me, visible, recognized, at peace with taking up space. After dinner, After the presents had been opened and the grandchildren had been tucked into beds borrowed from spare rooms, the adults gathered in the living room with coffee and cookies. Someone suggested we share what we'd learned in the year since the birthday party that had changed everything. My mother went first. I learned that I didn't protect my daughter the way I should have. I saw Tyler's behavior and didn't stop it because I thought keeping peace was more important than standing up for what's right. I learned that silence is complicity, even when it comes from love. My father. I learned that pride should be spoken, not just felt. I was always proud of Rebecca, but I didn't say it enough, didn't defend her enough. I let her disappear because she seemed okay with disappearing. I learned that we have to actively make space for the people we love, not just assume they'll claim it themselves. Jack cleared his throat. I learned that legacy isn't what you build, it's what you model. I spent Tyler's childhood teaching him that worth comes from achievement, from being the best, from living up to impossible standards. And he internalized that as worth comes from being better than others, which became worth comes from making others seem worse. I learned that what we teach by example matters more than what we teach with words. Tyler spoke last, voice steady despite emotion. I learned that tearing others down doesn't build you up, that jealousy is just fear wearing different clothes, that the person I was trying to be, the tough, accomplished, respected man, was already in my family. I just couldn't see her because I was too busy trying to prove I belonged in the same category. He looked at me. I learned that real strength looks like doing the work every single day to become someone better than you were yesterday. And I learned that from you, Becca, by watching you finally claim the space you always deserved. They all looked at me then, waiting. What had I learned? What wisdom did I have after a year that had turned my life inside out and remade it into something unrecognizable? I learned that you don't serve your best self by being your smallest self, that making yourself invisible doesn't make others more comfortable. It just teaches them that you can be erased, that your light doesn't diminish anyone else's light, and pretending otherwise serves no one. I looked around the room at the faces I loved. I learned that service and sacrifice matter, but so does being seen, that you can be humble and visible at the same time, that it's possible to honor what you've done without becoming arrogant about it. And I learned that it's never too late to start living like you matter, because you do. We all do. The fire crackled. Someone refilled coffee cups. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the backyard where I'd once pushed Tyler on that swing my father built, where we'd played as children before life taught us to be competitors instead of family. Emily caught my eye, smiled that smile that meant she was proud. Hannah squeezed my hand, and I sat there in the living room of my childhood, finally visible, finally recognized, finally free of the weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. The story didn't end there, of course. Stories never end cleanly. Tyler continued therapy, continued working with veterans, continued becoming someone his father could be proud of and he could respect. My parents aged, slowed, eventually moved to assisted living where I visited often. My daughters built careers they no longer apologized for. Neptune team grew older, their children grew up, the ripples of that night continuing forward into futures I'd never see. And me? I kept writing, kept speaking, kept sharing my story with anyone who needed to hear it. The book sold well enough for a second printing, then a third. I spoke at military events, at women's conferences, at corporate leadership trainings. I became, improbably, a voice for visibility, for claiming space, for refusing to hide competence behind false humility. But the best moments remained private. Quiet conversations with young women who told me my story gave them permission to stop apologizing for their success. Messages from men who recognized toxic patterns in themselves and were working to change. Letters from veterans who'd served in silence and were finally starting to speak. Each one reminded me, this mattered, not the medals or the ceremonies or the recognition, though those had their place, but this, the permission, the inspiration, the slow cultural shift toward valuing visibility as much as humility, toward understanding that you can honor your service without diminishing it. I'd spent 35 years flying aircraft, but it turned out my real mission was teaching people how to fly. Not through air, but through life. How to stay aloft when gravity pulls you down. how to navigate by instruments when visibility is poor, how to choose courage when safety is available, how to land gracefully after turbulence, how to believe that your wings, your story, your light deserve to be seen. Steel Phoenix, they called me, a bird rising from fire. But I understood now that I hadn't risen from anything. I'd always been flying. I just finally learned to stop pretending I was grounded.